Chapter 6 Charity Case. Delia woke from her nightmare and whipped back the covers. Her heart thudded like a drum in her chest. She expected the boots to be there, still stuck to her feet, but her feet were bare. She could still hear the jeering laughter echoing in her ears. It took a moment for her breathing to normalize. She wiggled her toes just to make sure everything was as it should be. The dream had felt so real. It was just a nightmare, she told herself. It didn't really happen. Still feeling jittery, Delia forced herself out of bed to get ready for school. She took a deep breath, surveying her shoe options. She had one pair of sneakers, one pair of flip-flops, and her new boots. The ratty old ones had been tossed in the back of her closet, but they weren't really an option. Not only did they not keep her feet warm, but also she had no doubt that Harper and her friends would tease her relentlessly if she showed up in them again. She stared at the box containing the knockoff boots, feeling sick to her stomach. The House of the Ville logo seemed to glare back at her. She didn't have a choice, though, did she? She dropped to her knees, pulled the box to her, and removed the lid. Her nose wrinkled. The boots even smelled secondhand. Maybe they won't notice, she told herself, glancing down at the boots. But she knew it was just wishful thinking, because she had no choice but to wear them. Her mom had insisted on it. Plus, Delia felt a little bad about last night's tantrum. Her mom did work hard and had tried to get her something nice. She clearly did not understand that these knockoff boots weren't the same as the real one. Steeling herself, Delia pulled on the boots. At least they weren't uncomfortable. She clomped downstairs, keeping her eyes on the shoes. Actually, they didn't look so bad when she wasn't staring right at them up close. Maybe if she was really lucky, Harper wouldn't notice. She entered the kitchen, avoiding looking at her mom or Miss Smith directly. I'm sorry about last night, she said to the boots, and to her mother, who sat at the table sipping her coffee. The air felt thick with tension. Mrs. Smith watched silently. Apology accepted, her mother said, rising and sweeping her up into a tight hug. I love you. You know that. Even when you act like a teenager, Delia finished with a snort. Yeah, sorry about that. Yep, that, Mom agreed. Plus, I think the boots look super cute on you. Me too, Mrs. Smith agreed. Not that anyone's asked me for fashion advice in ages, though back in the day, you should know, I had quite a few gentlemen suitors. Wait, you did? Delia giggled. What happened? Mrs. Smith glanced at the puppies. Honestly, none of them loved me as much as my doggies. Well, except Mr. Smith, of course. But after he died, I didn't want to settle down with anyone else, and I was happy living here on my own. Honestly, Mrs. Smith, I think you get wiser every day, Delia's mom commented with a wry smile. She turned to Delia. Today after school, you could go use the gift card to pick out a coat to go with them. Just don't forget to donate your old one. What you don't want, somebody else's family might need, Delia finished her mom's sentence. She had heard that line 1,000 times. But it was true. Delia knew because they'd been one of those families. She glanced down at her feet, feeling cheered. Her mom was right. Maybe she could find a cute coat at the thrift store, even if it was used. She fingered the gift card in her pocket. At least these boots were nicer than the old ones, right? Delia rode the subway across the city, climbed down from the station, and headed for school. The sky was the kind of slate gray that promised bitter, cold weather and lots of snow. She was grateful for her new, warmer boots. She passed under the ornate seal that marked the entrance to Gilded Crest Academy, inhaling the hallway smelling. This school even smelled clean and sterile, unlike her old school, which reeked like the boys' locker room. She liked that about her new school. Plus, not having to push and shove just to make it to class on time was a welcome relief. Maybe Gilded Crest wasn't all bad. Maybe there were good things too. But as soon as she stepped inside, Harper spotted her from the other side of the hall, where she was clustered around her locker with the glam posse. Just like yesterday, they looked like they stepped off an influencer's feed. Their makeup perfect, their hair effortless, and their clothes flawless. They had their phones out and were showing each other pic-perfect posts. Each of them wore the House of DeVille boots, the real ones. Delia froze the second Harper locked eyes on her. She watched as Harper's eyes tracked down her body and landed on her ripped-off boots. O-M-G, Harper mouthed, elbowing the other girls in the posse. Charlotte and Ella followed her gaze. It really did seem like these girls always moved in a pack. 3 sets of eyes fixed on her boots. 3 sets of glossed lips broke into cruel snickers. "Look at her faux boots," Harper cackled, pointing at her boots and laughing. She aimed her phone at Delia. "Nice try, Charity Case," Charlotte mocked her. "How could she wear those?" Ella sniffed. Hot humiliation shot through Delia's entire body into her cheeks, and her stomach clenched. Everyone in the hall, every single kid in her school, turned to watch the commotion. She had hoped they wouldn't notice. She'd even convinced herself that the boots weren't that terrible, that her obsession with the brand was misplaced, like her mother had said. But soon, more kids started laughing and pointing at her boots. It was just like her horrible nightmare. Even Grant noticed her this time. Pausing as he walked by, he pulled out his earbuds, eyeing her with concern. "You okay, Dee?" he asked. But Delia couldn't find her voice. She couldn't take it. It was her nightmare coming true. She ducked her head and ran for the nearest bathroom. "Delia, where are you going?" Grant called out. But she ignored him. The last thing she needed was for him to pity her. That was the last thing she wanted from any of her friends. Pity wasn't kind. It was the opposite. It was embarrassing. Worse than that, it was cruel. Delia flung herself into the bathroom, shutting the door behind her. The jeering laughter faded away, but it wasn't good enough. She ducked into the last stall and locked the door, feeling worse than she ever had her whole life. That was when she noticed her phone was pinging nonstop. She pulled it out and checked the screen. A bunch of pic-perfect alerts popped up. Delia's heart all but stopped. She opened the app and clicked on the alerts. Apparently, somebody had tagged her in a post, and not just anybody. It was Harper, who had the top account trending at their school. Oh no, Delia thought in alarm. She wouldn't. She couldn't. Delia clicked on the post and almost dropped her phone. Harper had posted a pic of Delia. In it, Delia was running away from her, hair flying, ugly boots on full display. Harper had even circled her cheap boots with a virtual red marker. The caption read, #phony, #knockoff, #faux boots, #charity case, #go back, #public school. Delia felt like fire was consuming her body. Under the post, hearts poured into the comments. All the kids in her new school were liking it, pushing the humiliating picture up the rankings for their school. Delia couldn't believe it. Then familiar names began posting hearts as well. Delia's friends and classmates from her old school. When Alia's and Zoe's names popped up, Delia almost threw the phone at the wall. How could they? Her best friends. She had never felt more betrayed. It was one thing for Harper and her posse to make fun of her, but it was a whole other level of terrible for her real friends to like the post, or the people she thought were her real friends. Now Delia felt like the whole world was laughing at her. Her chest was tight. She had to get out of here. She couldn't face another day at the school. Just then, another DM popped up from the mannequin account. Delia scanned the message. Keep your faux boots. Trust me. What did that mean? Delia frowned at the message. Why would she want to keep the faux boots? They were ruining her life. The plastic mannequin face stared back at her, offering no clue. Delia felt a shudder. Why was the stranger stalking her account like this and sending her all these weird messages? She quickly hit block and shut the app, feeling exposed. Delia thought about ditching school, but she'd never done that in her life. She wouldn't even know how to do it, and she definitely didn't want to face her mom when she found out. No, she was just going to have to suck it up and get through the day. She waited until the bell was about to ring, watching the seconds tick down on her phone, before slipping into class at the very last second, making sure not to make eye contact with a single living soul. After school let out, the worst day of her life, Delia headed for the shopping district off Michigan Avenue. The wide, tree-lined street had the most luxurious designer stores. Town cars dropped off shoppers clad in designer clothes looking to add to their wardrobes, while other fancy cars squealed into parking garages or metered parking spots. Delia trudged down the street from the train, trying to stay warm despite the punishing wind whipping off the lake, for which the street was named. Her eyes roamed over the stores, even fancier than the last one, with mannequins posed in their front windows and lit by glamorous spotlights. Not that she would afford to shop at any of them. She was bound for Replay Vintage, which occupied a little storefront in a narrow side alley. It was off the beaten path for a reason. As she walked in her faux boots, each footstep reminding her of the horrible day at school, she window-gazed. While not everything had gone terribly that day, at least she'd done well on her math quiz. Nothing, not even good grades, could make up for the mocking laughter in the halls and Harper's Post to pick perfect. Delia distracted herself by studying the windows she passed. Mannequins in various glamour poses and adorned in designer garb stared back at her, while shoppers swarmed into the shops off the sidewalk, only to emerge with hefty shopping bags. Envy sparked in Delia's heart, cold and fiery at the same time. She skidded to a halt in front of her dream store, House of DeVille's flagship shop. It was bustling with patrons, browsing the racks and trying on clothes and shoes. Inside, girls her age snapped selfies, probably posting them to Pick Perfect. Delia watched them, her envy intensifying. What she wouldn't give to be able to shop there too. She glanced down at her faux boots. The salespeople would probably peg her as a poseur the second she stepped through the door, just like Harper and her friends had, or an alarm would go off to inform the whole shop that she didn't belong there. She reached down and felt the hard outline of the gift card in her pocket. The thrift store was her only option. Still, she couldn't quite tear herself away. Not just yet. The mannequins in House of DeVille's windows posed in black and white faux fur coats, and each one of them wore the infamous boots. Knowing how expensive the boots were, Delia couldn't even imagine how much those coats cost. She peered up at one mannequin wearing a striped coat, trying to imagine herself twirling in front of the mirror wearing it. The mannequin's eyes stared right back at her from its expressionless plastic face. A chill shuddered through Delia. The eyes seemed to be boring into her. Feeling unsettled, Delia turned her attention to the next mannequin, this one in a plaid coat, and her heart jumped. This mannequin was looking at her too, but she could have sworn that a minute ago it had been facing in the other direction. She moved down the sidewalk a bit and looked back again. Wait, how? Now all the mannequins were looking at her, their heads turned in her exact direction. Delia tasted fear on her tongue. She blinked purposefully, and when she opened her eyes again, all the mannequins were looking away, their heads tilted in the opposite direction. What was going on? Delia's pulse began to pound. The mannequins were moving on their own. She was sure of it. Or was she? Mannequins weren't alive. They couldn't turn their heads on their own, and it wasn't as if they were actually watching her. She was just anxious and overtired. That was the only explanation. She should just get this ugly coat buying situation over with and get home to do homework. Get this awful day over with already. Resolutely, Delia turned away from the display window and headed down the street. As she was passing by the glass doors to House of DeVille, they whipped open, caught by the biting wind, and a pack of girls emerged. And not just any girls, Harper and her posse. No, Delia thought, freezing in place. This cannot be happening. Look, it's the charity case, Harper sneered. Did you like my pick-perfect post? The glam posse snickered at her. They all clutched black and white House of DeVille shopping bags stuffed with pricey merchandise. I see you're still wearing the faux boots, Harper scoffed. What are you doing here anyway? Yeah, you can't afford the real thing, Charlotte added with a sneer. That's right, Ella snickered. You don't belong here. The glam posse stared at her. Delia looked down, feeling humiliated. What's the big deal? She stammered, her cheeks burning. My mom just made a mistake. She just got the wrong brand. They were out of my size and she... Yeah, right, Harper said. Prove it. Show up to school tomorrow in anything House of DeVille and I'll take that pick-perfect post down. Delia couldn't breathe. Harper had called her bluff. She knew Delia couldn't afford anything in that store, not even a pair of socks or a keychain. But she couldn't show weakness. Girls like them preyed on weakness. It was what they lived for. Fine, I'll see you tomorrow, Delia said with as much confidence as she could muster. Given the situation, even though she had no idea how she could follow through on her promise. Then she turned and fled down the street, angry tears pricking her eyes. She didn't belong at Gilded Crest. Why did her mom think it was a good idea to send her to that stupid school? And now, thanks to Harper's trending pick-perfect post, she couldn't go back to public school either. She'd be the laughing stock of the whole campus. Even Zoe and Alia thought she was a loser now. She thought about messaging her friends or even vid-chatting to see if it was just one big misunderstanding. But how could that be a mistake? They knew what they were doing, and they had to know that she would see all their hearts and comments. She needed Harper to take that post down, but there was only one way. Show up tomorrow in anything House of DeVille. The dare from Harper echoed through her head, but that was impossible. Harper was right. Faux boots were all her family could afford. She was doomed to be a charity case forever. She couldn't show her face at Gilded Crest ever again. Her vision blurred by tears and shame. Delia ran down the alley toward the thrift store, and she ran head first into someone. Her feet slipped, and she fell backward. She heard a familiar voice. Hey, slow down. Are you okay?